of ClimateTech, hunting the Gigacorns. My name is Mara Steinbrenner, and I'm the co-lead of the Impact Festival, and I'm very honored to moderate the panel today. FAANG companies have disrupted the way we view business from their size, impact, and change. Whether it's good or bad is a different conversation. So the question is this actually something the climate tech industry should be striving for? Stay with us for the next 25 minutes to hear from industry leaders on how they view the current situation, what's different compared to a few years ago, and where the focus should be to drive actual change and make an impact. I will briefly introduce our panelists before we dive right into the discussion. First, welcome to Jacob Rowe, co-founder and partner of 2150. 2150, an emerging leading European climate tech venture capital firm that has backed emerging gigacorns. Before co-founding 2150, Jacob was a tech entrepreneur and operator, angel investor, and the chief product officer of the Berlin-based venture builder and investor Rocket Internet through to its IPO. Welcome, Jacob.
Thank you.
Next in the round is Tim Schumacher. Tim is a German investor and entrepreneur with a focus on impact and climate investments. He has founded and invested in multiple startups. One of them is Ecosia, which is especially notable because it uses all its profits to plant trees and has planted over 160 million trees so far. Under the roof of Ecosia, Tim very recently co-founded the Ecosia World Fund. Welcome, Tim. It's great to have you here.
Hello.
Next up, I would like to introduce Chante Harris to you. Chante is the Director of Climate Investments and Partnerships at Second News. Chante is at the helm of driving climate innovation, building sustainable cities, advancing cross-sector collaboration, and tapping into the community to launch better solutions and technologies. Chante is also the co-creator of Women of Color Collective in Sustainability, a digital community supporting women of color. A warm welcome to you, Chante.
Thanks for having me. Excited to be here.
And last but not least, we have Patrick Sheehan with us. Patrick is the founder and managing partner of ETF Partners. Patrick has worked in venture capital since 1985 when he joined 3i. He was instrumental in founding 3i's venture capital practice and later became the founding managing director of its Silicon Valley operation. Before this, he was a research engineer and a technical consultant for Bocconi Space Systems while completing a PhD in electronics. Welcome, Patrick.
Hi, it's nice to be here. Thank you.
Great. So not to waste any more time, I would like to dive into the topic right away with you and start with you, Patrick. As I just said, you've been in the venture capital industry for many decades now. Can you explain what the current situation is and also what is different to a few years ago and what the scale of the challenge is we're actually talking about?
Gosh, that's a whole number of questions already, isn't it? So, we are really in extraordinary times, and I think we all know why. But I think we'll see profound and rapid change as a result. I think part of your question was going back to the birth of clean tech, however many years ago, when we just after we started our fund, and things are very different now. Back then, we were engaged in a very, very missionary technology push. But technology push, as I'm sure you know, is kind of hard work because great companies need great customers. Today, I wouldn't say it's easier, but it's wonderful that we have so much technology pull and we can find companies who have real demand for their products. So I think we're also, by the way, seeing far better entrepreneurs and far more experienced entrepreneurs. So you'll find that in spite of all the headwinds generally in tech, I'm very optimistic about the particular area that we're all in.
Mm-hmm. And maybe asking towards Jacob or Tim, where do you think the focus should be at the moment? And is what we're striving for, the unicorn status, is that something sustainable and we should thrive for that now, like within the Gigacorn conversation?
Do you want to go at it, Tim?
Either way, go ahead.
Well, I think that the whole question about a unicorn, I mean, what is that? That's an outlier company that's driving insane returns for venture capitalists. And that's a great thing, obviously, especially for those founders and investors. But it also means that it's a company of significant impact. And that's why we started using this pithy term of the Gigacorn to change the focus from the financial returns primarily when it comes to size to the impact that a company can generate. And that comes back to one of our core beliefs, which is that to really have the kind of impact we need to transition some of the most difficult and most important sectors of the world, you need very, very big outcomes in terms of industrial companies and these ClimateTech companies or Gigacorns, we like to call them. And we don't see a trade-off between building a big, profitable, successful business, creating potentially entire new industrial subsegments, and having a lot of impact. Rather the opposite. If you cannot build a very big, successful business without the great customers that Patrick speak about, it's going to be bloody hard, right? So it's going to stay small, or it's going to stay sort of impact, maybe even sort of quasi-philanthropic. So we need sort of capitalism at its best to do good work, so to speak.
Yeah, I would agree with you, Jacob. Just adding one thing, I think, especially for all the founders listening here, I think as a founder, you always need to decide what should your life look like, and what appetite for risk do you have, like how big do you want to be, and there are some areas which just you cannot do without VC. Like if you are in a technology field where you have fierce competition and you have years where you're not going to make any revenue, there's no other way to get that done without venture capital. On the other side, if you're in something which makes money sooner, so SaaS, for example, or take Ecosia, Christian, the original founder, he bootstrapped that for about 2 years before I came in originally as an angel investor. Those things work very well, and then if you don't go for the VC route, then of course you have other possibilities, steward ownership, a bit more philanthropic angles. And yeah, Jacob, you said it, like you might not get as big, but if we have hundreds of those little flowers, then together they can be again big. So then sometimes that fixation on unicorns, which of course as a VC you have to have, is there a big danger? Is a bit dangerous. But yeah, it's really about like what market are you in and what type of person are you? And it's no such thing as a one size fits all, I would say.
Yeah, I want to jump in really quick. I think echoing what Tim said, a lot of what my team has done through Venture for ClimateTech is help founders think about their journey through building a company, which is super critical in our space because, I'll speak from our perspective. We're working with PhDs, climate scientists, folks who've been in a lab for decades, but maybe have never built a business, right? And so how do you take those folks who really understand the science and the tech and help them get to a viable business model that's both scalable, but also investable? And I think the other piece that I'm starting to see, particularly in this past year, be more vocalized in our space is this idea of different capital stacks, right, for different things. I think ultimately when it comes to the conversation around unicorn, I agree that VC is a critical part of, accelerating the rate at which we build, the rate at which we reach customers. And, VC isn't necessarily always the right capital stack for different parts of a company. So in the case of, the companies that we're helping, many of them are building in the hard tech and the material science space. So they might take VC dollars, right, to help think about accessing their first pilots or their first LOIs and getting to that revenue. But when it comes to iterating on the product and really staying in that kind of R&D stage, it really means that they need to be tapping into other types of capital stacks like government grants or, philanthropic capital. And I think a part of what's happening in our space is, both founders and investors are really understanding at this time how important it is to equip founders with the right type of capital at various stages. And so what I see happening, which maybe wasn't even happening 2 years ago, is this conversation of not like VC or this, it's about VC and how do you actually support founders in unlocking that capital in a seamless way so that they can scale and really have what they need or be equipped really to gain the type of traction and ultimately revenue that we all want to see, because revenue leads to energy transition, right? Which leads to the crux of this conversation. Are we actually creating a more sustainable future or not?
And can I chip in as well? And just to try to disagree slightly, just for the sake of it, right? More interesting, because clearly we all want to back ambitious people. We all want the most success possible. But I think there's a slightly unhealthy obsession with unicorns, etc., versus companies that are just really successful. And we're moving from an era, I fear, of abundant, cheap money to an era where money will be more expensive and more scarce. And so I think the critical thing for entrepreneurs is to focus on building a really top quality, resilient business that meets real customer needs. And actually the growth will happen that way.
No, fully. I so much agree. I mean, probably one of the most exciting portfolio companies at 2150 is a business that it's probably 12 years old. We met them when they were already doing 10 million and were turning a profit. And it was kind of like it was a thing. It worked, right? You could leave it alone and it would have a little bit of impact. And the founders gradually realized, oh wow, I mean, if I really could scale this up to capture the full market opportunity, it would be incredible in terms of the impact we could drive. And he decided to ruin his life trying to go really big, right, and risking the house in a sense. So that's another kind of situation that happens once in a while now. There's also another point. Someone said the other day, someone famous, I think, and I just grabbed the takeaway. I forgot who it was, but said that we also need thousands of these companies that just address and mitigate 2 to 4 million tons of CO2 emissions, like locally in their environment, in their small pockets of the economy and the geography. And I think that's very true. And as a 270, 300 million type of VC fund, that's obviously hard to help, because
we would invest in the aggregators then. The market you're just describing, Jacob, is fragmented markets where you need a marketplace at the end of the day.
Exactly. Yeah. Enabling technologies or marketplaces, things that help a big, resilient sort of cloud of entrepreneurs who will do sort of have more micro impact. There can still be some interesting cases around that. But so I would definitely encourage it. And I think that can be a much better life as an entrepreneur, to be honest, because, being backed by a lot of venture capital seeking these outsized returns is also leading to, it's at least a choice you have to make in terms of what kind of life you would like to configure for yourself.
I think the main message I also take away from that now is that towards entrepreneurs, don't be too focused on the unicorn status, but rather build a great business. And at the end, it'll lead you there. However, also turning a little bit away from the unicorn status itself, but focusing on gigacorns. So the startup that can cut 1 gigaton of carbon from the atmosphere every year. Do you think, considering the large challenge that's ahead of us, that is still something important to strive towards and could be more sustainable rather than just focusing on the unicorn status? Whoever wants to jump in first.
Well, I suspect everyone here looks really hard at the impact of the companies that we back and at their potential to make a real difference. I suspect we all also struggle with exactly how we measure and talk about that, but we, none of us would do it unless we thought there was a big environmental impact, as I would say.
Yeah, and actually that the environmental impact, and that's one of our core philosophies at World Fund is a predictor for financial return. If you save a lot of CO2 and CO2 prices are going up, all the companies are giving themselves net zero pledges, not knowing how they're actually going to do it. But with all of those things happening as the broad macro trend, the companies which will either save or sequester the most CO2, those are the winners of the next decade. So it's actually a predictor. And so, as you said, Patrick, I think everybody here in this room measures impact, not just for the sake of it and not just for this little ESG label or something, but for actual profound market opportunity, very similar to like the total addressable market, I would say.
I agree, but we can't all just necessarily reduce everything to CO2 avoided. The environment has many dimensions.
It's more single focused, but it also helps if you keep a focus.
and there are a lot of investors who are maybe not in this session today that are relevant and I think incredibly important. And a lot of the deep tech investors out there, they by definition, half their portfolios are basically energy transition companies, because usually they try to solve problems for industrial customers in a better way than status quo, costing less money. And the cost drivers are usually labor or inputs, and inputs are usually either directly or a derivative of energy. So naturally, a lot of these deep tech portfolios out there, they actually have like pretty significant parts of them that address the energy transition.
Yeah, I'll just mention briefly that 5 of our founders are breakthrough fellows right now, and obviously, if we're looking at kind of their framework of what it means to have an impact in this space, there are very important metrics and big metrics that they're looking at. I'd say similarly, we're working with really early stage founders through Venture for ClimateTech. And so that means, historically, it's been mostly pre-seed companies, and it is really hard to measure at that stage. So I think there is a conversation around how do we focus on metrics because they matter, but also how do we not keep founders and people out of building in the space because maybe the term or the metrics that we're referring to, folks haven't quite wrapped their head around. So I do think there's something to be said about what does it mean to measure, and of course have measurement, be a part of the discussion. But when it leaves people out or folks feel like it's not accessible, I think we're also not doing our job well, because we want more people building in this space. We want more people investing in this space. And so it needs to be a yes and, right? It needs to be a let's measure, but also let's make sure, I think, Patrick, I alluded to the fact that a lot of the conversation these days is around CO2, There's a lot of other ways to measure impact in the environment, right? And so we don't only focus on CO2, we look at greenhouse gas emissions across the board. I mean, people would argue that we need to be more expansive than that, right? And so I do think there's a question of how do we continue to measure, and how do we do that in a way that allows folks to enter the space and make it accessible.
Mm-hmm. Maybe touching upon that point right away, Chante, how do you think we can create the infrastructure in the community that fosters such growth and collaboration?
Yeah, I think it's a great question. It's a critical question. I know at Second Muse, we run a number of different incubators, accelerators, challenges, and I actually am departing the team. So I'm leaving. I'll say in a minute what I'm doing, but I'll start with saying that the past about 2 years, we were running a design lab to figure out how do we close the gap for early stage funding. Because I think as much as we talk about, founders maybe aren't right for the unicorn status and the VC route, we also don't necessarily talk about how hard it can be, particularly for certain founders, right? I run a collective for women of color working across the globe and sustainability, some of which are founders. And it was quite hard for them to get initial family and friends round, right? Or any sort of VC investment, because we know the numbers around who receives an VC capital. That doesn't mean that their solution, right, or what they're building is less impactful or is less incredible. It just means that, unfortunately, there's historically been a lot of blind spots, right, in the VC world. So I say all of that to say that there really is right now not only I think a funding gap whether you're choosing the VC route or not, but I think also if you're a founder, and I'm speaking from a US perspective because that's what I know, you're oftentimes jumping through so many different hoops to access different types of capital. I always like to point to Danelle from Block Power because he's a big example that most people know, but it's really important to name that he's taken in VC dollars from some of the top VC firms in the US. He's taken in government grants. He's gotten debt funding. He has Morgan Stanley on his cap table, and he's at Series A, right? And so I think it's important to name how much founders building in this space have to navigate all of the different capital stacks that, quite frankly, I don't think funders have done a good job making it easy for founders to navigate. And so a part of what we found through working through this design lab, which was interviewing investors, government, officials who are giving out government grants, families and catalytic capital entities, is that we oftentimes, when I say we, I'm speaking more broadly about funders and investors as an ecosystem, don't understand each other. And so we don't actually understand how founders are talking to someone that is giving them capital outside of where we focus. And so there really is a need for, I think, more of this conversation around how does VC dollars either integrate or not with existing founders' cap tables, right? Or what does it mean for a founder to access certain type of catalytic capital at a stage where they really, might need some flexibility in how they're building. So all of those things, I think, actually require the ecosystem of funders to come together and think about what it means for us to collaborate, for us to make it easy for founders to navigate that. So that's a bit of what we've been doing. I won't be continuing that work because I mentioned I'm leaving, but our team is planning to, and we support global founders so they can be based anywhere in the world. And we're really helping them enter the US market and access customers in the US. Where I'm headed to is actually to look at climate finance innovation and maybe how do we create a product that allows founders to actually navigate all of these capital stacks. That's as broad as it is right now, but I'm really excited to kind of have the opportunity. It's a residency. I can't say with who yet, but essentially a very large entity that's been funding this space, particularly looking at talent and hard tech for quite some time. So I'm excited to, hopefully have an update in the next few months about what I've found and what might be possible in the space.
That's very exciting. On the notion of ecosystems, I mean, I think there's one thing that sometimes divides people a little bit in ClimateTech, which is whether you kind of collaborate and create ecosystem dynamics with some of the incumbent industries that may have been, contributing to the polluting and destroying the environment over decades of growth and prosperity development. And some folks say, hey, we need to just disrupt and go from the outside in and destroy these old industries. We cannot collaborate with them. We can barely shake hands with them. And on the other hand, you have a mindset, which I think is what we try to promote, is like, how do you sort of collaborate with and help those industries transition, which I think is incredibly necessary. I mean, I think when people talk about like the real estate sector, like, green construction and property technologies, like, you're not really debating whether you should destroy all the real estate out there. It's kind of nonsensical, right? But if you start talking about oil and gas, it's kind of like this like phantom in the background, like pipes and stuff. We don't really see it in front of our eyes, right? But if you think about that infrastructure, the same for the energy sector, some of the industrial sectors, the chemical industry. So, I mean, I think you just need to really think about how you can collaborate with some of these industrial ecosystems to help them transition and leverage the resources that are useful and relevant for a future. That could also be the capital. I mean, if you are so inclined. It can be controversial sometimes, and you should obviously be mindful. But yeah, I think there is an argument for collaboration and joint transition rather than just disrupting.
There is an argument, but change is never driven by the incumbents, is it? I mean, when you listen to an incumbent, they always argue that they are changing and it's all going too fast, and we need to just slow down to be more under control. And in the case of climate, that's absolutely wrong. And so part of me agrees with you, because you can't just wreck everything. but actually, I think if we want radical change, we need to back people with radical ideas.
Yeah, and I'm not suggesting we should wait for the incumbents to drive the innovation and the transition sort of in front of the experimental frontier. I think rather the opposite. But there are cases where you kind of wonder. Like I had this, I think this classical case I always bring up is deep geothermal drilling, right? And I've been looking at some of the great companies out there, and some of the most amazing ones have created these science fiction drill bits with lasers and plasma and all this kind of stuff. And they can drill into 10 kilometers of depth and unlock, abundant, almost free, at least very low cost energy. But the problem is just like, how do you do all this drilling? Like, it's not enough to have a drill bit. Like, you need rigs, you need experience, you need to understand rock mechanics at all. It's just completely, the drill bit is just one little piece of it, right? It's an enabling piece, but you need a lot of complementary assets and knowledge around that. And there are lots of jobs that can be repurposed, and a lot of infrastructure that can be repurposed for that. But you kind of need to shake hands with the perceived devil, in a sense, like the drilling industry, which is a lot of like big companies in Texas. So maybe Houston has part of the solution and not just the problem. And but I think you need to be open for those those.
Yeah. Well, if we talked more, we'd probably end up agreeing, I think. But as I sometimes say of this harder tech, it's not like software; it has to work. And it generally, as you say, with small companies, you have a component in an overall system solution. Yeah.
I think just when I look at the time, we need to slowly wrap this chat up, even though it's, I think, an incredible, interesting input you gave today. The key messages I take away from myself are that we are in a huge momentum at the moment in terms of ideas, people, and capital. The rate of change is accelerating very fast. And we have that tension between driving venture disruption and climate tech and working with existing industries, like you just pointed out, Jacob. And we need to find a way to work together. So in order to wrap this up, I would really like to still hear from each of you, maybe in one or two sentences, what are you excited about right now? Where do you see the relevant areas for investments in the industry, or where do you see leverage points to combat the climate crisis? Maybe starting with you, Tim.
Yeah, sure. Happy to start. I mean, we look at anything that helps decarbonization. In fact, we actually, the first thing we did when we started the fund was take Project Drawdown and just go through kind of one by one and see, okay, which of those areas are VC fundable and which are the ones where you need other ways, government or policies. So, of course, then you always end up with the same type of topics, energy-related topics, and also related fields. So property technology, but also transportation. All of those things go very closely together. Then there's materials and manufacturing is a bit of a separate topic, but there's interesting things. And also then the whole big field of food, agriculture, land use, so FALU. Where you see anything from alternative proteins to different ways of farming, regenerative agriculture, and of course within these there are a couple areas we're super excited about. I mean, definitely energy, the whole decentralization of energy resources is a topic we're doing a lot of investments and we're very excited about. But also property technology, where we have also quite a background from my co-founders, Daria, for example, who worked in that field for many years, and Mark, and so we have some knowledge there because it's one of those underlooked things. But the consumption or the production of CO2 in the housing for both construction, but also then later heating and things like that, it's just so enormous. So it's definitely also an area we're super excited about. But it's just there's so many things you could like. I could run for hours about the interesting segments. That makes it fun, and it makes it that we also need so much. We need more of funds. We need more founders. We need more of everything. And that's my hope for the next decade.
Amazing. I think we have 1 minute left before Michael kicks us out of the session. So Jacob, Patrick, Chante, whoever wants to jump in next, but please keep it short.
I can say a couple of things. We're excited about the bioeconomy. So we believe that a lot of the things we consume, burn, and interact with, materials, fuels, foods, will increasingly be produced in a bio-industrial sort of framework. And we're developing sort of our initial thesis around how we try to have more impact in the emerging economies. Right now, we invest a lot in developed markets. We hope the technologies trickle down. We see it in certain cases, but we also see huge barriers, and we see it's not exactly the CO2 footprint that's the biggest problem in some of the most at-risk economies and societies. So that's another focus. And then home decarbonization, as Tim also said, that's a huge one that is also connected to the energy grids. That continues to be a big focus of ours.
Thank you, Jacob.
I'll just say quickly, I'm excited about, I'll be quick. I'm excited about the IRA and what that means, particularly in the US for all things deployment, particularly buildings, infrastructure. We've gotten EVs out there, but how do you actually build the infrastructure around that? There are a number of companies that we funded and also just early stage companies that have business model innovations that we're really pumped about to see scale over the next few years. So.
I'll offer you two brief thoughts. One, I'm particularly excited about the impact of digital technologies applied to the climate crisis. I think there's huge opportunity there and far more impact than people realize. Firstly. Secondly, I think when we come out of the current recession, we'll be in a world where we're past the tipping point where renewables, particularly solar, are just obviously cheaper than other forms of energy. And so I'm excited not about backing renewables per se, but about the consequences of that, which I think are enormous.
Thank you for sharing your knowledge in today's session. I could listen to you guys for ages and ask you questions. I'm very happy that I was in the position to ask them some questions today. And yeah, I think a lot of people could take something away from the panel today. And I'm sure you are happy that other people reach out to you during the ClimateTech Founder Summit. And yeah, thanks so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks for having us.
Thank